Welcome back, boys and girls. Ignore this wind-blown, frizzy, crazy hair mess. It was a little windy outside when I went outside for lunch. Chapter 6. Catch that boy! There was more excitement than Henry had ever seen. All kinds of doctors were examining him now, poking and prodding as if he were not a boy, but a pincushion. A pincushion is something that women or men who sew, they have like a little, kind of like a hacky sack that they put all of their pins in so that they don't lose them. So he was being poked and prodded like a pincushion. And Dr. Fargo was bounding about the room, talking about chocolate fever, a new disease, making medical history, and things like that. Henry was tired and afraid. He wanted to be left alone. He wanted all the doctors to go away. He wanted to be home. He wanted, in fact, to be just about any place in the world except this hospital. So he did something very simple, something his heart told him he had to do to survive. He jumped off the examining table and began to run. In a flash, he had bolted through the doorway and was running down the long corridor. Behind him, he heard shouts of, "Stop and catch that boy!" Two nurses at the end of the corridor tried to catch him, but Henry was simply too quick. He dodged past them and darted down the stairway. Down, down, and down he went, down 3 whole flights of stairs and out into the main lobby of the hospital. Ahead of him, a guard at the door held out an arm. Running as hard as he could, Henry crashed through his grasp and into the street. Without pausing to think where he was headed, Henry ran. As he was about to turn the corner, he looked back. There was a whole army of people pursuing him. He escaped! He escaped the hospital! Catch that boy! Doctors in white coats, nurses, guards blowing their whistles, policemen waving their arms, and behind them he could see Dr. Fargo. Henry didn't wait to see any more. "Legs," he said. "Don't fail me now." And with that, he turned the corner and took off down the street. He ran and ran until he had no breath left, and then he ran some more. His legs flashing in the afternoon sun, Henry darted down one street and up another. He had no idea where he was. He had no idea of where he was going, but he kept on running. People stared at him whizzing by. A few even raised their hands as if to stop him or say something, but Henry kept right on running. After a long while, he couldn't see or hear any of the people running after him. "I must be far ahead now," he thought, but suddenly, up ahead at the corner, a police car flashed by with its siren screaming. "They must be after me," he thought with an alarm. "I'm a wanted child." Sick at heart, Henry pushed himself to run faster. His head hurt, his side hurt, his legs hurt. But he kept on running. His lungs hurt, his eyes hurt, even his hair began to hurt. But Henry kept running. At last he could run no more. He was finished, done. He had to rest, and to rest he had to hide. Without thinking about it, Henry ran down a large grassy alley that lay between 2 white houses. At the end of the alley was a large garage with one door partly open. Henry sneaked in and looked around. There was an automobile parked inside, but not a person in sight. With his last bit of strength, he plopped down on the floor beside the automobile. "A fine mess you're in now," he thought. "You've run away from the hospital. The police are after you. Your mother must be terrified. And you have a disease no one has ever heard of." The more he thought about his predicament, his situation, the sadder he became. A lump rose in his throat, a tear ran down his cheek, a sob escaped his lips, and he was crying, sobbing out loud, really crying. He cried for a few moments because he was so sad. He cried some more because he was lost. He then cried for a long, long time because everything had become so hopeless. At last he could cry no more. Henry dried his eyes and tried to think out of his situation, or predicament, like we heard on the other page. He would not go back to Dr. Fargo in the hospital, of that he was certain. Nothing on Earth or any other planet could make him do that. But what if he went home? What would his mother and father do? They would take him back to Dr. Fargo in the hospital. They would have to. Never, said Henry. Out loud to himself. Never? Nope. I'm not going back. In the dim light of the garage, Henry looked at the big brown spots on his arm and began to hate them. Stupid spots, he thought. Why did you have to happen to me? Feeling angry, he stood up and began to pace. That means walk back and forth, in an empty garage. I can't go home, he thought, and I won't go back to the hospital. All right, then. I'm on my own. Somewhere there must be a place for me. A place to go until these big, stupid brown dots disappear. A place far away where no one has ever heard of me, or the hospital, or Dr. Fargo, or my parents. I would miss my kids. I hope they never, ever, 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 ever move far away from me. Feeling much braver now, with things somehow settled in his mind, Henry laid down to rest for a while before setting off on his journey. Chapter 7. In the Schoolyard. It was almost 2 hours later, and the sun was somewhat lower in the sky. Henry looked cautiously out of the garage. He saw no one and started on his way. He walked for a long time, trying to stay on side streets and being careful to avoid attention. It was not easy. People kept staring at him. Henry ignored them and kept on walking. In the middle of the street, makes no sense. In the middle of the street down which he was walking stood a school. In the middle of the street where he was walking, down it was a school. Henry could see lots of boys playing in the schoolyard. He decided to walk through the yard to get to the next street. A minute, pause there. Notice I stumbled over that and it didn't make sense to me. The way the words were laid out, my brain wasn't understanding it, and you notice I had to reread it, and then I stopped reading out loud and I read it in my head, and then I understood what they were saying, so I was able to explain it to you. It's always really good for you to do when you're reading. If you're not understanding something, stop. Don't keep going. Stop, reread it, sometimes a couple of times, and then continue once you understand what it was saying. So, from down the street that he was walking on, there was a school, and he could see lots of boys playing in the schoolyard. He decided to walk through the yard to get to the next street. As he started, though, all of the boys stopped playing basketball and roller skating, and they all looked at him. It was as if all the noise and the action had become frozen, like a movie or a TV show that just suddenly stops or you hit pause. Henry kept going. He was about halfway through, just about in the middle of the yard. The kids seemed to come to life again. In less time than it takes to tell about it, he was all surrounded by kids. Henry looked at him. All of the boys stared back. They had formed a tight circle around him. Henry didn't like it. One of the tallest boys, who looked a good deal older than Henry, spoke up. Boy, are you ugly? Yeah, really ugly, said another kid. Ugly, ugly, all of the boys called. I'd better be polite, Henry thought. Excuse me, he said in a quiet voice. Could I get through, please? But the boys didn't move. This is bizarre. I'm starting to wonder if he's dreaming right now. Because remember, I'm thinking as I'm reading, and he was in this car, and he said he laid down to fall asleep because he was tired. So I'm wondering if this chapter is about a dream he's having, but that's just a prediction I'm making. I could be completely wrong, but the only way to find that out is I have to keep reading. The big boy, who seemed to be the loader, spoke again. I've seen pimples before, but those are ridiculous. They're not pimples, said another boy. They're warts. Yeah, warts. They gotta be warts, said a third boy. Now all the boys were speaking up. Ugliest warts in the whole wide world. in the world? Man, they're the ugliest warts in the whole universe. I thought I've seen ugly kids before, but this kid, this is the ugliest kid. Horrible, disgusting, revolting. He stinks, too, a fat boy with glasses said. Yuck! Like a candy factory. Nauseating. The more the boys called him names, the worse Henry felt. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The big boy in the crowd held up his hand to silence the others. Quiet down now, you guys. I want to talk to Mr. Ugly here. In a few moments, the crowd of boys went silent. Now then, you, Mr. Ugly, you got a name, kid? Before Henry answered, he thought carefully. He was ashamed of himself and the way he looked, but he was even more ashamed of the group of kids around him. How dare they act so mean? He hadn't harmed them. And now, when he could definitely use a friend, they had clearly said he is not worthy to be a friend. Henry got angry, but he kept his anger firmly under control. My name is my own business. It's none of your business. The gang of boys hooted and shouted at Henry's reply. A few even whistled. Don't get fresh, kid, the big boy said. We don't like fresh kids here. A few of the larger boys edged closer to Henry, closing the ring around him tighter. Let me hit him, Frankie, a voice said. That is not nice. Let me get him, another boy said. Henry thought quickly. Touch me and you die. I have a rare and mysterious disease. Whoever touches me will catch it and die a horrible death. The gang stopped closing in on Henry. Oh yeah? You expect us to believe that? The big boy said. I don't care whether you believe it or not, Henry said. You're bluffing. Bluffing? Henry said. Touch me, and you'll find out if I'm bluffing. I have chocolate fever, one of the most horrible and catching diseases in the world. Chocolate fever, echoed the big boy. You're making it up. Henry could see that he had the crowd on the run. Chocolate fever, that means he could see that the boys were believing him. Chocolate fever is the worst disease ever discovered on Earth, he said. You know what happens if you get chocolate fever? Your whole head swells up. Your mouth gets dry. You break out in big chocolate spots, like me. You look ugly. And then the really bad stuff begins to happen. So here we have Henry and the whole gang of boys, all of the boys that were mean to him. And now you can see that they're all looking at him like, ooh, I don't want to go by this kid. The boys were listening closely now, and the circle around him was beginning to widen as the gang started to back away. He's making it up, fellas, Big Boy said. Don't listen to him. But the boys were listening all right and believing every word. Henry began to walk towards the boys. As he did, they made way. They moved away from him. Slowly, a path opened, giving him room to get by. I don't want you to die, Henry said, as he passed through the ring of boys. So you just better let me be on my way. None of the boys tried to stop him. Even Big Boy, as Henry passed, getting closer, he made no move to touch him. Just as Henry neared the outer ring of the boys, he heard one of them say, Hey, I know who he is. I heard it on the radio when I came home from school. There's a kid who ran away from the hospital this morning and the police are looking for him. His name is Henry Green. Big Boy called out as Henry kept walking. Is that you, kid? Are you Henry Green? Henry Green? Henry called back over his shoulder. Never heard of him. Just the same, as soon as he was clear of the schoolyard, Henry broke into a run and didn't stop until he had left the group of boys far, far behind. So, my prediction that maybe this was a dream, I think I was actually wrong. I don't think this was a dream now that he's having. I think maybe this actually happened. We will have to continue to read to find out. See you in the next couple of days for our next chapter.